Hey people, John here from Fast Films, and today we're going through a 2014 romance movie called Love, Rosie. The movie starts at a party. Rosie, the main character, is about to get married. She isn't happy but pretends to be. As she gives a speech, there's a flashback to 12 years earlier and we are introduced to Rosie's best friend, Alex. They have been close since childhood. One night at a club, Rosie gets drunk and things get romantic between her and Alex right before she passes out. The next morning, she doesn't want to talk about what happened and tells Alex to forget about it all. He seems disappointed about this but doesn't argue. Alex and Rosie are at a beach party and with prom around the corner. They discuss who they'd want to prom with. Alex goes with Bethany, a girl he has a crush on, and Rosie goes with Greg, the fittest boy in school. In their computer class, Alex and Rosie tease each other in a chat room. Alex then tells Rosie he slept with Bethany. This enrages Rosie and causes her to use swear words. She gets sent to the headmaster's office but Alex comes to her rescue. At prom, we see that Rosie might have some feelings for Alex too as she seems jealous when watching Alex dance with Bethany. Nevertheless, she gets together with Greg. The experience turns out to be rather short and disappointing. It also leaves her in a mess. Needing help, she turns to the only person she trusts, Alex. Alex gets his friend, Rosie, to the hospital where a doctor helps her out. Rosie drives back home with Alex and they have a moment in the car. Alex suggests running away with Rosie and she smiles after joking around with it. Later on, Rosie's parents completely frown at the idea of Rosie going to America to continue her life there. Shortly afterward, Rosie follows her father to his workplace and tries to convince him to allow her to go to America. Her father tries to cheer her up and accepts her proposal. Rosie hugs her father and takes the bus home. Sometime later, Rosie gets accepted into Boston's University. She runs towards Alex's house but is attended to by his sister, Claire, who tells her to sit and wait for Alex, who was with Bethany upstairs. Rosie nearly pukes and leaves the house without seeing Alex. Later that night, Rosie goes to a pharmacy and asks Ruby, her friend, for some medicine to help her with her medical problem. Ruby gives her a pregnancy test which she uses on the spot. She gets the result and immediately contacts Alex. She chats him up to help her out but Alex tells her he's going out with Bethany's parents that night. Rosie gets disappointed and wishes him well. Later on, she meets with Alex in a diner. Alex shows her his letter of acceptance into Harvard University. Rosie acts a bit weird about things and Alex asks her why she's not happy they're finally getting accepted into their respective college. Rosie becomes defensive and tells him she's got something to attend to first. Alex says he's going to stay behind for her but she urges him to get the flight. At the airport, Alex presents her with a gift and she hugs him tightly. She nearly romances him at the airport but doesn't. She stares at her love as he walks towards getting his flight. Rosie gets back to the pharmacy to discuss with Ruby. They talk about the pregnancy being positive and Rosie decides not to abort the baby. She comes up with a plan and gets home. After a while, Rosie lies to Alex about her being in Boston while still being at home. Rosie's now heavily pregnant and her entire family stares at her stomach and marvels over the baby kicking in her belly. Later that night, Rosie's water breaks, and everywhere is in chaos. Rosie eventually gives birth to a baby girl. She carries her little bundle of joy and caresses her. She names the girl Katie and promises her daughter to be a good mother. Some time passes and Rosie tries to calm her little daughter. Her father comes in to calm her down as well and they both smile. A couple of scenes pass and Rosie learns the do's and don'ts of handling her baby. One afternoon, she meets with Bethany on the road and avoids her. Later during the day, Alex gets back and shocks Rosie with his visit. Rosie reluctantly invites him inside. They get acquainted in her house when Alex tells her he knows she had a baby and plays with little Kate. Alex and Rosie get to the beach and discuss things. Rosie says she wishes people would treat her the same and not differently because she was now a mother. They later part ways and Alex gets to a bar. There, he meets with Phil. Phil talks to him to cheer up and introduces Alex to his sister, Sally. Time passes by and Alex gets an apartment in the USA. Katie grows up and learns to walk. Rosie gets a job as a hotel cleaner. During one of her cleanups, she sees a magazine with a revealing picture of Bethany and throws it out. The morning, Kate catches Rosie in bed with another man. They all get prepared for the day's work and Rosie takes her daughter to school. Back in Alex's house, he and Bethany argue over some hair being in their bathroom. Rosie plays with her daughter on the beach and receives a text from Alex, telling her he misses her and that she should come by one day. Rosie smiles and gets a ticket from Alex to come over to the USA. She gets on the plane and arrives in the US. She meets with Alex and both of them have a party. Rosie meets with Jonathan at a night party. Jonathan asks her out when Alex gives her a drink. Later on, the boys prank Alex by throwing him into the pool. He drags Rosie inside the pool with her and they both have fun. Later on, they get fortune cookies and get to the park. They sit down on the grass and talk about Katie. Rosie tries to kiss Alex but he refuses. The next morning, they get to Alex's house and meet up with Sally. They get served some fancy breakfast at the table and Rosie finds out Sally was pregnant with Alex. She gets disappointed a little bit but congratulates them instead. She then chastises Alex for not telling him quickly but shrugs it off. Just then, Sally throws a tantrum at the dinner table, sending all their food flying up in the sky. Later on, Alex, Sally and Rosie are at the art gallery, admiring some pictures. Sally comes to pick Alex up from Rosie who was clearly tired of all the shenanigans. Rosie walks out and Alex follows her out. The two of them get into an argument about his girlfriend being pregnant. Rosie tries to condemn the kind of life he lives and it backfires immensely on her. Rosie walks off very sad and Alex allows her to go. Rosie gets back home to England and stares at her computer. She makes some colorings and just stares outside her window. At her job the next day, Greg pays her a visit. He apologizes for being a notorious dad and gets a chance to meet her dad. The three of them, Greg, Rosie and Katie, all have a good time. Rosie has a good time with Greg and tells her friend, Ruby, one day at work. Ruby chastises her for going back to the man who got her into a mess and Rosie just says she'd like to belong to someone for once in her life. Alex sees an invitation to Rosie and Greg's wedding. At the wedding, Rosie gets dressed and walks down the aisle with her father. She and Greg get married and set up their house. Meanwhile, Alex takes out some artwork as Rosie catches her daughter with a boy camping out in her room. She giggles and walks away. Back at her workplace, Rosie tries to call up Alex but Sally picks up the phone instead. She tells Rosie that she and Alex broke up and made their ways separate. As Sally discusses, her water breaks and Rosie later finds out Alex wasn't the father of the baby. They both chat a bit with Rosie consoling Alex for having a bad relationship. There's a time jump and 5 years later, Rosie catches her 10-year-old daughter having some private time with a boy. She chases her mother out. After a few days pass, Rosie kisses her parents goodbye and goes back to work. As she's cleaning the floor at her workplace, Bethany walks in and books their hotel. She boasts to Rosie and Ruby about her busy schedule before waltzing to her room. Rosie calls her mother one day and finds out her dad was no more. At the cemetery, she sees Alex who comes by to console her. He hugs her tightly when Greg comes in and jokes around at his father-in-law's funeral. This makes Alex angry but he keeps it calm inside. Later on, Alex sends Rosie a letter. The letter arrives at Rosie's residence but is intercepted by Greg. Rosie comes by to ask him how many letters she'd received. Greg hides the one from Alex and gives her the others. Rosie gets back inside to read the last letter her dad sent her before he died. Rosie reads the letter with tears in her eyes. That night, she stares and discusses their future with her daughter, Katie. Alex continues sending her texts, asking her if she was happy with her family and her life and got responded with, yes. Rosie appears at work the next day and talks with Ruby. Greg calls Rosie and tells her some disappointing news. Rosie drives with Ruby that night to a particular party. She catches Greg with another lady and punches him in the face. She then returns home and scatters her stuff. She searches desperately for something and sees the letter Alex sent to her. The one that Greg hid. She reads the letter and immediately goes to chat Alex up. She then video chats Alex and finds out Bethany and Alex were getting married sometime later. That afternoon, her friend Ruby talks Rosie into fighting for her love, Alex. She uses a very brilliant metaphor that convinces Rosie to pack her things and get to the airport. She arrives at the airport with Ruby, her son, Toby, and Katie. After some inconveniences, Rosie gets to Boston. They get into the van they rented and drive to the church where Alex was holding his wedding. She sees Alex come out of the wedding hall with Bethany. Later that evening, Rosie says some things about Alex and the crowd giggle. She then confesses her love for Alex right in front of everybody as a friend. Alex just sitting there almost in tears from what he heard. At the dance, Rosie sees Alex dance with Bethany and hides out of sight. Just then, Toby and Katie dance together and things get intimate as Toby proceeds to kiss her. Katie pushes him off and runs away. Alex notices this and runs to meet Katie. Alex and Rosie follow Katie to talk to her. They talk Katie into not making the same mistake they made. After some time, Toby looks for Katie and finds her with her parents. He tries to apologize for the act but Katie kisses him instead. Alex then tells her stuff about the first time their lips touched each other. He let her know he knows she forgot about it. Rosie ends things and gets back to England. She renovates her father's house, transforming it into a hotel. As they celebrate their opening, they receive their first visitor. Rosie recognizes him from long ago. As he goes in to get settled, Alex waltzes into her hotel. Both of them share a smile and Alex tells her he's ended things with Bethany. He also rents a room at her hotel. Rosie follows him to the room and holds him tightly. They stare at each other's eyes with true tears of love and share the most enjoyable kiss ever. They cry so hard as they romance each other, almost like two lovers who are reunited after a very long